I've always been one of those people, Claire, that if somebody says to me, you're good at that, you should do it, I would do it, because that was the easy option rather than to actually do any soul searching as to what I thought I should do. Do you know what I mean? But the problem with that was that you kind of go down a route of designing all this stuff, obviously looking at trends and everything, but you could have a whole collection that nobody bought a single swatch of. And it was definitely what I wanted. I absolutely was going for it. And then as soon as I got it, I was kind of like, oh, what have I done? And was not creative at all. I couldn't knit, I couldn't crochet, I wasn't really interested in any of it at all. It's that realisation at 50 that you don't actually have to care what anybody thinks of you, and it's quite freeing. I feel like I know my stuff now, and I feel comfortable with it all.
Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Creativity Found, a community for creative learners and educators, connecting adults who want to find a creative outlet with the artists and crafters who can help them do so, with workshops, courses, online events and kits. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. This time I'm chatting with Jane Crowfoot, otherwise known as Janie Crow, about being average, stroking fabrics, and how the first granny square she crocheted was a geometric anomaly. Hi Jane, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You are a crochet designer with myriad patterns and kits for crafters to make for themselves. You host regular crochet alongs, and you are the author of the Ultimate Crochet Bible and the Complete Crochet Handbook, which is a particularly good one in my opinion. But crochet was not always your go-to creative outlet. So tell me what kind of creative activities you enjoyed when you were younger as a child, and were they encouraged in you, whether at home or in education?
Yeah, so I was always really average at everything. You know, those school reports that come back and say average. What was it? C+ in our day. You used to get a C+ with everything C+. And then art, I'd get A. And I was just bad at everything apart from arty stuff. And I used to really love like painting, drawing. I used to love wrapping my Cindy dolls. Actually, they were Pippa dolls. Do you remember? They were little Pippa dolls.
The little version, yeah.
Yeah, they were little tiny dolls. And I used to sort of wrap them in fabric and make clothes out of, you know, bits and bobs and elastic bands and stuff. So I was always bad at everything, but good. Arty, good. Which obviously when it came to education was a bit harsh, really. I kind of scraped through my GCSEs, O-levels at the time, and I wanted to do our A-level, but the only way I could do that was to do 2 other A-levels as well. And I think I chose sociology and English literature, both of which, you know, didn't want to do, but I wanted to get my art A-level. And from there, I then went to the local college and did an art foundation course. And I think it still is the same if you do an art degree. You do the foundation course to kind of show you all the various arty, designy things you could do. And in those days, I know at schools now they do things like textiles and graphic design and all that sort of stuff as options, but we didn't kind of have that when I was at school. So I just scraped through my A-levels enough to go and do a foundation course.
And so it was at the foundation course that you get introduced to other arty things you can do.
Yeah, so we did a huge amount of drawing, you know, loads and loads of life drawing and loads of still lives and stuff like that. But we also got the chance to do a bit of textiles, some photography, pottery, you know, bits of everything. It was lovely. It was really lovely because you got to dip into everything and decide what you did and didn't like. And I was totally convinced that I was going to be a fine artist and go and do a fine art degree somewhere. And then I had this amazing tutor. Her name was Sue, and I can't remember. I was trying to think last night what her surname was. But she was one of those really sort of arty women. She had this sort of crazy, curly hair. She used to go around with all this silver jewelry on and smelt of patchouli, you know, one of those kind of like, always had amazing knitwear on, which I realise now was probably like Kay Fassett designs, you know, bright, beautifully knitted things. And she sort of said to me that there's something in my work that she felt was textile-y. So and I've always been one of those people, Claire, that if somebody says to me, you're good at that, you should do it, I would do it, because that was the easy option rather than to actually do any soul searching as to what I thought I should do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but was she wrong?
No, she wasn't wrong at all. Perhaps it's because it was the right thing that I just went, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. Yeah. So I went to Winchester and did a degree in textiles.
So did that then, like the foundation, did that give you lots of different aspects of textiles?
Yeah. So I went to Winchester, which is really great because, well, at the time it was a really, really tiny art school. There was only about 500 people there. And it was really kind of country bumpkin-y, you know, it was a little uni. It really suited me well. In the first year, it was a little bit like doing the foundation course all over again, in that we dipped into different textile design methods. So we did a bit of weaving. We did machine knitting, not hand knitting, machine knitting on the domestic, you know, the domestic machines. And we did printmaking. So we had to learn all about how you made lino cuts and all sorts of things like that to do sort of screen printing and all that. Yeah, so we had a year of that. And then I specialised in my second year. Again, the tutor said to me, I think you're what they used to call constructed textiles, which is either knit or weaving. And I chose knitting then.
Does that mean like making the fabric?
Yeah. There was print, which is obviously printing an fabric, and then there was constructed, which was either weaving or knitting, machine knitting. So for my second 2 years I did machine knit as my degree.
As an aside, I went to my daughter did her master's at Southampton, and we went to her graduation, and the majority of the graduation was from Winchester, and it was a fashion degree. I'm not quite sure exactly what it called. It went on for hours, Jane. It was really long. There were loads of people. My daughter's bit was English, was an English master's, was very, very small class. And the fashion BA from Winchester went on forever. Anyway, after the degree, off you go into work. Is that an easy thing to do after your textiles degree?
Well, so I think it's that thing that happens when anybody does a degree in anything. You kind of go into this wonderful environment where you're nurtured, aren't you, and looked after and encouraged to be amazing. And you kind of go out into the world thinking that you're going to be amazing and that everybody's going to offer you these incredible jobs. I really honestly thought I was going to walk into, you know, a job at Chanel, or, you know, we were very much geared into, the idea was that we'd all work for fashion houses. And then the reality of that actually is that what a lot of fashion houses did at the time is they would buy swatches from designers and have a team of in-house designers who actually do fashion drawings and make them into cardigans or, you know, knitwear in some shape or form. And what I'd done is I'd done a purely textiles degree, not a fashion degree. So we hadn't really learned how to make garments. So what I ended up doing was doing swatching, which actually is kind of what I do now. And I love it, is creating like, you know, rectangles of knitted fabric, which were then sold via an agent to fashion houses. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. But the problem with that was that you kind of go down a route of designing all this stuff, obviously looking at trends and everything, but you could have a whole collection that nobody bought a single swatch of. Financially, it was really hard. So
was that freelance then?
Yeah.
Wow.
So the majority of us probably had agents that we then sold our swatches through.
Right.
they would be the ones taking all the swatches out to America or wherever and showing the fashion houses. So the kind of glamorous bit that you thought was going to be part of your job, actually, you know, you sat at home with a knitting machine.
So when a fashion house or whatever uses your pattern from your swatch, do they then go and make it?
Yeah, it was nice because you didn't have to provide them with any written pattern or anything. You just literally made a swatch and they would decipher it and reproduce it. And often what the swatches would have, a pocket detail and a neck detail or loads of little like crammed in stuff so that they could do a whole range out of 1 or 2 swatches.
So it's very relevant, and we'll come on to this later, but it's very relevant by the sounds of it to me, to what you do now with your designs and your colour choices. Yeah. So tell me about going to Rowan.
So when I was working as a swatch designer, I just wasn't making enough money. You know, I was probably mid-20s by then and thinking about having a mortgage and a house and children and stuff. And there was just no way that what I was earning was going to ever make a living. So I ended up getting a job at John Lewis, lovely John Lewis, in the blinds and trimmings department. It was wallpaper, curtains, blinds, cushions. So it was sort of textile-y. And I did that for about a year. So I kind of felt it sat with me okay because I was earning money and still managing to stroke fabric every day and go and plump up some pretty cushions and things. So yeah. But while I was there, I'd probably been there about 18 months. I'd had my son by then as well. So I was back at work part-time after having him, and I saw an advert in the Evening Standard for a job with Rowan Yarns. And for people that don't know Rowan Yarns, they're quite a high-end hand knit company. And they were looking for what they called design consultants to work within the John Lewis stores to help sell their products. But it was hand knit, you see. Do you remember those old McCall's books? Learn to sew, learn to knit, learn to do everything, tatting, everything. I had one of those. So I gave myself a sort of crash course in hand knitting. But I think the reason I actually got the job was because Kate Buller, who interviewed me, had also been to Winchester. She's a bit older than me, but she'd been to Winchester too. So I think she realised that although my hand knitting was probably not all that great, she could see that there was something, you know, there that would work as a design consultant. So I did that for quite a few years, actually. They had a team of consultants, probably about 20 of us across the country in all the John Lewis's. And we were sort of seen as the young face of hand knitting. It was quite technical. People would come into store with a query. You had to know your stuff. And for me, it was really good because it really got me interested in the technicalities of hand knitting, like how stitches work, how colours work, all of that, which I hadn't really done in my degree, which sounds crazy, but I hadn't really kind of gone into it in that way before. So yeah, it was good.
It's a bit like engineering. One of my previous guests is a weaver and she did an engineering degree. And when you're talking about the stitches and how it works together and how you actually take something apart, you know, to see how it works, that's what that sounds like.
Yeah. It's that whole thing of like being amazed that a piece of string and a needle can create something incredible. And then like, okay, so how did that actually work? How do you do that? Yeah.
So you said you did that for a certain amount of time.
So I worked as a consultant in store until I had my daughter, which means it must have been about 3 years, which meant I went into store a couple of days a week. And I tried to get a bit of design work going at the same time. But when you've got small children, it's almost impossible to get anything done, isn't it? So I did that for about 3 years in store, then had my daughter Summer, and then I had a year off when she was born. And I remember after about a year, my husband said to me, please go back to work. Because I was like, don't you dare put your cup down there and, you know, like get really house obsessed and obsessed with all these things that I now think, oh, flipping it, you know. I still stayed with Rowan, but I started to do quite a lot of teaching with them, like workshops and stuff. I became a workshop tutor. So I travelled quite a lot and did various demos in lots of different stores. It wasn't just John Lewis. And that again was brilliant for me because that whole thing we've just talked about of understanding how stitches work and, you know, how colours work and stuff. It was a really good step. And I probably did that for about another Probably about another 10 years at least, workshop tutoring. And then at the same time, I used to sit in the evenings and play with crochet and knitting and stuff. And people would commission me to make things for them just to try and make a little bit more money. I remember doing a whole series of little knitted slippers for babies when I worked with Debbie Bliss. She used to do these little bunny slippers, and I used to have this production line of slippers just to make probably about a tenner, just to get a little bit more money.
Do you think that kind of production line, or, going out and going to the other shops and presumably kind of doing what they want you to do, does it in any way stifle, or were you able to feel still personally creative?
Yeah. I was thinking about this last night as well, and thinking that at that time I wasn't actually designing anything. I didn't create my own things, but the fact that I was prepping for workshops and doing swatches and doing that whole technical side as well, I felt that was it was still creative, working out how, if you want a cable to do that, you have to move your stitches over. So quite technical, but also creative. And I didn't ever feel, I think because I was probably knitting in the evenings, even though it was kind of to order and stuff, it still ticked my creativity box, but not quite like it does now. What I do now can still stroke the yarn and look at colour and stuff. So
I think problem solving, like you're talking about the cables and working things out, problem solving is a big part of creativity.
Yes, it doesn't actually have to be that you're creating a physical thing, does it? It's that whole process in your head is also creative. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You actually took a managerial role with Rowan as well. How did that go?
Yeah, so it was kind of the logical step. I felt like I was being asked to work more days, and I was teaching a lot, and I really felt like the next step up was to take on a management role within Rowan. And I was offered the role of design consultant manager, which meant I looked after the team. There was 2 of us actually, looked after the team of consultants across the country. And it was definitely what I wanted. I absolutely was going for it. And then as soon as I got it, I was kind of like, oh, what have I done? Because it was suddenly, it wasn't workshops. I didn't really have time for many workshops. It was timesheets and spreadsheets and lots of travelling and lots of phone calls to managers of shops and working out who's gone sick, who's done. And also taking on the stresses of your team as well. So if your team was stressed, and I'd never been in a position where I'd dealt with that kind of thing before. I'd always floated into a workshop to people who wanted to be there all day, taught them nice fuzzy things, and then came away again, So being in a management role for me was it was a disaster. And I think I lasted probably about a year. Honestly, I was so stressed. I'm not a great traveller. I really am not a great flyer. I can do it now, but at the time I really stressed about it. And I was doing those awful flights where you go to Glasgow at 5 o'clock in the morning and come back at 10 o'clock at night. And it just absolutely pushed me over the edge. And that was probably, the worst year of my life. It really was. No, it honestly was. I started getting panic attacks and all, really bad. Yeah. And I think a lot of it was taking on the responsibility of other people's lives and being aware that, what I was doing had an effect on them. Found it really difficult and was not creative at all. I couldn't knit. I couldn't crochet. I wasn't really interested in any of it at all. And it took a long time. Oh, that sounds all really deep now. I'm kind of like, oh, don't know where that came from. But yeah, it sapped my creativity, absolutely. And yeah, it was absolutely what I'd wanted, which is really weird, isn't it, how that works out?
You were able to recognise that. And did you then say, I'm not going to do this job anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I think once the panic attack started, it was kind of like okay, I have got to address this. And my husband was really massively supportive and said, no, you don't need to worry about money or the day-to-day running of stuff. Just give it up, because he could see what it was doing. It does make me think about these poor people who have these stressful jobs every day and dread going to work.
Yeah. It's also a difficult thing and a good thing to do, but it is difficult to do. And I have spoken to a number of guests who have had the same experience, but to actually accept that what you thought you wanted to do in reality isn't what you want to do. And it's not a failure, or you don't have to keep doing it just because that was your aim or that was your hope for the future. Once you realised this really isn't good for me, it's fine to not do it anymore. Presumably go on and, I mean, look at you now, you're going to go on and explore other things, but being able to accept that and come out when you did.
Yeah, I do think a lot about, like I just said, like people who are the main breadwinners in families, or just generally, you know, if you lived on your own and you had to earn that amount of money, it must be incredibly difficult to then be able to make a decision to say, right, that's not for me. I can't do that. I'm walking away from it. I mean, I was very lucky that I could do that. It did feel a little bit like a failure because I'd wanted it for a long time, and I probably grieved it a little bit, you know?
Completely understand. Let's move on. Let's start the trajectory back up again. So you've talked about hand knitting and a little bit about crochet and exploring it all. How then has crochet, tell me a little bit about the timeline. How did crochet become the favoured baby in this creative travels?
So, yeah, I mean, I was very lucky. So I probably spent about a year just not even knitting or crocheting, nothing. I just couldn't. Well, I wasn't into crochet then, so no knitting. And when I look back on that year after that job, I actually don't know really what I did. I probably did some workshops and a few bits and bobs, but nothing much. Around about that time, Rowan started to introduce, so I still had that connection with Rowan. We didn't fall out horribly. It was all fine. I had Sharon, who was my manager, really looked after me and made sure I was okay. And she sort of steered me down this route of helping her in her office and stuff like that. So I was doing sort of clerical stuff. You know, nice things, talking to nice people on the phone and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so around about that time, they started to introduce crochet into the magazines. They do 2 a year magazines. And as consultants, design consultants, it was expected that the consultants would learn how to crochet, because if people were coming into store asking for help on crochet, the consultants needed to know how to do it. So I went along to a learn to crochet workshop. I had done it already. I'd done like little edgings and things as part of some of my swatches in my degree. But yeah, I went along to this workshop and came away with a migraine and a 5-pointed granny square. Just like, I was like, this is not for me. I don't understand it. I don't understand. And I think I actually left early as well. I was like, got to about 3:30 and I was like, no, this is not for me. I'm going home. I can't do it. Got a migraine. I'm going. But I think the thing that got me about crochet is that technical side of it. You've got a hook and a piece of yarn. And if you draw yarn through that hook, you know, all the loops on your hook enough times, you can create a fabric. Whereas knitting, you have to set it all up before you start, don't you? You cast on like 100 stitches, whatever, and then you're creating a backwards and forwards fabric. And what I absolutely loved about crochet was the way it's often done in the round, organic, little, portable. I could do a few rounds and chop a colour out and add another one in. And it just grabbed me. It absolutely grabbed me. And from there on, I kind of felt that with the knitwear, when I did the knitwear degree, I'd always felt like I was all right at it. I was okay, but I wasn't amazing at any of it. It was quite, and when I look back at it now, actually look at my portfolio and my final projects and stuff, I think, oh, you know, God. So yeah, I just felt that once I started crocheting, it was my thing, and it kind of went from there, really.
And yeah, so how did it go from there? Did you were, you know, like growing it, teaching it?
Yeah.
You can tell me as well about the crochet alongs and things that you know started to develop from that.
So I wanted to write a book, and I wanted it to be crochet things for the home, like crocheted cushions and crocheted rugs and little crochet bits and bobs around the home, which you now see a lot, a little collection. And I put it to Collins and Brown, publishers, and they said, yeah, we quite like the idea of that, but what we actually want you to do is a techniques book. And because of what we've talked about already, how I love the whole technical side of things, I sort of said, well, I think I could do that, but promise me that when I finish it, we can do the book I want to do. As a result, I wrote a book called The Ultimate Crochet Bible. And I think the reason it was so successful is because I was a kind of a beginner myself, which feels a little bit fraudulent, really, doesn't it? Because it's kind of like you're writing this Bible about crochet, when actually some of the techniques I learned in order to write the book. But I think it made me look at techniques in a more, instead of having 4 steps to a technique, I would have 8 or 9, because it confused me, and therefore I thought, well, somebody else will be confused by that, so I'm going to make it longer. So yeah, I did the Ultimate Crochet Bible, and it went really, really well. But it was one of the first big, that whole sort of 2000s, no, it must have been 2010-ish, that whole revival with crochet. I think that's probably why it was popular as well, because there were so many people coming to crochet again. And then they did let me do the book I had wanted to do. And it was a bit of a disaster. I still love it, but it really didn't sell very well. It's what I'd done in the book that I really wanted to do. I mixed knitting and crochet together. And at the time, Collins and Brown said to me, it's not something we normally do, because there are knitters and there are crocheters and they don't meet in the middle. And actually the sales of that book proved that is true.
Oh. I mean, the thing that you say about doing the extra steps because you didn't understand it, as an editor of such books, I will often get, manuscripts from crafters and artists who know what they're doing. And it's my job to make sure that what they've written there, a beginner will be able to know what they're doing. And that often isn't the case. And you're like asking for clarification. It doesn't come off really, really clearly to me. So that's quite an interesting aspect to say, that being a beginner made you look at it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because we've recently worked on the Complete Crochet Handbook together, and it was really interesting process for me to come at it, a similar book, from a very different perspective now. And I did have to remind myself at times, now hang on, somebody might not know what I mean by that. And I'll put an extra step in, and I'm not going to just assume that everybody knows what that is.
Yeah, yeah. And it is an absolutely packed book. It's got all the content.
I really enjoyed that. I loved it. Really enjoyed doing it. It was nice to go back over techniques and stuff.
So obviously teaching, you've already talked about workshops and you're teaching within the book. Tell me about the crochet alongs. I'm assuming this is an online thing, and that gives it a nice wide appeal.
Yeah. So if you're in the knit and crochet community, you will have heard of knit alongs and crochet alongs. And it kind of came from something that quilters do. And I don't quilt or patchwork, but what they tend to have is these kind of patchworks that are made by making a block a month. So they'll be sent the fabric and the pattern for that month, create a block for a quilt. And then at the end of the year, they've got their handmade quilt. So a friend of mine, Debbie Abrahams, who was also a design consultant for Rowan, she still does it now, a project called the Mystery Blanket Club. It is a secret project that you work on over the course of, I think she does it over about 8-9 months. And at the end of that year, people have a unique project. And because we were good friends, she said to me, somebody's going to do a crochet equivalent of this, and I'd rather it was somebody I knew, i.e. you. So she gave me almost like the permission to use her idea for crochet. But what I didn't like is, again, I was still quite fresh to it. I was still quite not nervous about my skills, but I didn't like the idea of it being a mystery. That's for sure. I wanted people to have a rough idea of what they were getting into. And because I was using Rowan yarns, which have got that sort of high end price, I felt that I needed to give people a bit more of an idea of what, especially because the crochet market was quite small at that point as well. So for 4 years, I did what I imaginatively called the Crochet Club project, which was basically a crochet along where people made a project over the course of about 6 months. I fed patterns through to them as downloads, and they would make the project. I used to give them a rough idea of what it might be based on and what the colours were. But what I found difficult about that, and whether it was because of the insecurity of my feeling about my own design, but what I found quite difficult was the fact that because it was a high-end priced kit, I was very much limiting my audience. I was limiting my audience to people that had, I don't know, at the time, probably about £150 to spend on a yarn kit, which I couldn't necessarily find that sort of money for a kit. And because it was that sort of price, there was a pressure to, make it its money's worth. I found that pressure quite hard. So 2015, I designed a crochet along for Stylecraft yarns, and we worked out a deal whereby they paid me for my design work and they released it as a free pattern. We did show them the whole project first. So we showed them the blanket that was going to be the project. The brand manager, Annabelle, she has to forecast the amount of yarn that she thinks she's going to sell for something. And she'd forecasted huge amounts of yarn, and it sold in about, I don't know, the first couple of days. 6 months of yarn globally had been sold to do Lily Pond. And so that was the start of like my real flipping heck. This is cool. This is going to be good.
Yeah. I just want to ask about the actual technicalities of writing the patterns and giving all the information. How do you find that side of work?
When people think of what I do, they probably imagine I'm sat on my settee with the telly on, crocheting. And there is so much else involved. And actually, the crochet is a minimal amount compared to all the other stuff that goes on. And writing the patterns is the thing that takes so much time. And what I wanted when I started writing my own patterns is I'd learnt to crochet from this McCall's ancient 1950s book that made the assumption that everybody who looked at the pattern knew what it meant, knew what all the symbols meant, what all the abbreviations meant. There was no charts, no pictures, no nothing. It was just a written pattern in tiny type in the smallest possible space, squeezed in. So I straight away wanted to create patterns that a novice almost could pick up and understand. So I still have quite a long-winded writing style where, if you're not quite sure what stitch you're going into, I actually say it is the stitch next to the one with the picot on or whatever. And I always put step-by-step images in at every stage and measurements and everything so that crocheters that follow my patterns know that their project is going to come out the same as mine. Because, in these 1950s book, goodness only knows what it was supposed to look like, because there probably wasn't even a picture of what you were doing. It would just say, pretty doily or something. Those stages of creating patterns, there's the photography, the graphic design, the endless tech editing. It's huge tech editing. I've just been working on something this week, and you think it's ready. You write the word final on your document, final copy, and then you look at it again and think, oh, actually, there's still more could be done on there. So yeah, it's a huge process, but I love each process of it. I like each bit. And actually, if I did crochet all day, I'd probably have a hunchback and be blind in one eye.
That would be a look, wouldn't it? Oh, I completely understand. So then let's go. You've been talking up until this point, a lot of work with Rowan, obviously, work with Stylecraft. You still work with other brands, but Janie Crow is how we all know you.
Yeah.
How did you, again, you've been talking a little bit about, feeling nervous about saying I'm the expert in such a thing. So how did you find it to create the whole Janie Crow brand where people are buying your patterns, your designs, your colour choices, and also, are you able to keep, it sounds like you are from the way you're talking now, are you able to keep your creative enthusiasm and output while also everything else that surrounds making people know what Janie Crow is?
Oh, kind of, yeah.
I always like to do a big question that's like loads of questions all in one and then just confuse you.
I think the Lily Pond, the fact that was so incredibly well received, just spurred me on really. And one of the things I've always wanted to do is really push the boundaries of what crochet can do. And, you know, there's a lot of crochet around now and it's wonderful, but you see sort of like the young kids coming through, made a granny square, and they, you know, they're online going, I've designed a granny square and I've done this and I've done that. It's like almost like my friend Jo always says, it's like reinventing the wheel. It's all happened before. And when I sort of, not to take away from that, because it's really exciting when you first discover how it all works and how lovely it is. But I really wanted to go up. So I wasn't looking at the learner, at the beginner. I was really looking at the person who really wanted to push their skills. And I think at that time for me, being supported by Stylecraft in the background, running the social media on stuff, doing the PR on stuff, tech editing my patterns, all of that, I think that was incredible at the time, really, because it really helped me relax into, okay, so I can do this. Whereas with the Crochet Club, I'd always felt, you know, like I said already, a bit stressed about it, a bit worried about would people like it, would they do it and all that. And I think Lily Pond, and then the year after Lily Pond, we did a design called Frida's Flowers, which again was received really, really well. And I think because I had sort of 2 good years where I was really, really well supported, that started to grow my social media and made me feel more confident in my own ability to then, yeah, okay, so I can write a pattern. I can get a photographer to do good images. I can start to build my brand on top of, you know, those 2 crochet alongs. I was really lucky as well because, I mean, traditionally, crochet and knit designers exist because yarn companies want to sell yarn. Simple as that. And we've been really lucky in that the last sort of 10 years, especially, there's been platforms like Ravelry and Etsy where, you know, it actually champions the independent designers and says, look, there's a great knit designer, there's a great crochet designer, and you can download their patterns for small amounts of money. Go and buy the yarn in the same way that you would, but it's a push further forward on those in those patterns. So I think I was just very lucky that it all coincided at the same time, that kind of confidence that I probably had an audience for my designs by then. You know, the hard thing as a designer is you could create something beautiful and fabulous patterns, beautiful photography, but then it's getting it out to that audience. And the fact that my audience had grown so big over those couple of years kind of helped me then create Janie Crow in the way that I did. Yeah, and I was really lucky as well because my husband, just going back to the yarn thing, you know, Andy now, we work together full time now. He was the one that said, well, okay, so you'll make this amount of money from your design work, but if we add yarn kits to the website and hooks and needles and we do all that side of stuff, we're covering all the bases. Absolutely down to him, really, because I wouldn't have been able to do that as well as design, makeup kits and all that. I wouldn't have been able to do it. So it's very much down to him that we kind of built in the way we did. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's a mix of inputs then, isn't it, with different ideas?
Yeah, definitely. You know, he was coming at it from a very business level. I think that's quite important for creative people, isn't it? Having, you know, I just quite happily bumble along and not really think about the kind of business side of stuff. So the fact that he's also very techie. So things like building websites, that's his thing. He's good at that. Whereas that's not my thing.
I was going to say what a clever choice of husband you made. No, in the future would be your business partner as well as your husband.
I'm a massive believer in fate, and so he's got viral arthritis, which means from about the age of 25 he gave up a full-time job because he just couldn't physically do it. He's one of those people that just adapts to the situation. He was self-employed for a long time, and I think once you're self-employed, you see ways of making money, don't you? You have to. Yeah, I have been very lucky. Yeah, very lucky.
Brilliant. So tell me about your inspiration, because you do have a very distinctive style, and you said, you know, you wanted to take it up a level, but looking at the designs themselves are very distinctive, very beautiful. Are you getting your ideas from the actual making, or are you getting ideas from other places?
Sometimes it can be a really simple thing. It could be like, so I collect a lot of like wallpaper samples. I'm always looking at stationery. gift cards, wrapping paper, all that sort of stuff, looking through interior magazines, looking at trends. So some designs, like a really simple one, like I've got on the back of my chair, this one, which is Mystical Lanterns, that was just to do with the shape, tessellating shapes and working out how that would work in crochet. So sometimes it's tessellations and an existing pattern, but a lot of what I do is actually it links to artists a lot of the time. So when I did my degree, we had to do history of art as part of the degree, and we had to do a thesis and all that sort of stuff. And when I was a kid, my mum was really great at taking me to exhibitions and all sorts. I can remember standing in front of Matisse's, when I was probably about 9, and thinking, flipping heck, colour, amazing. And I think I like to root my projects in something like that. So I've done since 2019, I've based a lot of my designs on the arts and crafts movement. I'm kind of moving away from that now. I feel like I've done that. So to begin with, one of the first ones I did, Climbing Rose, was based on William Morris's Strawberry Fief design. And then a year later, I did Fruit Garden, which was based on May Morris, his daughter. It was based on one of her embroideries. And then this latest one, which is behind me, Spirit of Flora, was based on the work of William de Morgan, who was a arts and crafts ceramicist. And what I like about doing that is it gives me a chance to indulge myself in my love of history of art. But it also, I love to pass that on to the people making it so that they can say to their friends, oh, well, this is based on the work of William de Morgan. And I've been and looked at his work in the V&A, or I've got a book out the library about him, or I just love that. And it really came to the forefront when we did Fruit Garden, which was the one that I released in lockdown 2020, because people had nothing else to do. They really got on board with that whole, love of the arts and crafts movement, love of going back to simple things, away from the whole thing about William Morris and the arts and crafts movement was getting away from mass produced items and getting away from industry. Sitting at home making your lovely little pretty squares. It's really rooted in the whole arts and crafts movement, isn't it? So yeah, and I get lots of emails from people saying that they love the whole process of my design, investing time to go and look things up. And I've had people send me pictures where they've decorated their whole bedrooms around the blanket they've made. So yeah, I love it. Love it.
I like that idea of the extra dimension. It's kind of like an extra connection as well between yourself and the crocheter. Yeah, and the artist that inspired the thing. That's really super. So what are your plans or maybe aspirations for the future, near or far?
So Spirit of Flora, which was behind me, was a project that we released in a magazine last year. And what happens with magazines is the patterns then revert back to the designers after usually about 6 months. So this year is pretty much taken up with re-releasing Spirit of Flora. Because it was done in a magazine, it will have had a good audience, but it won't have had a global audience. So we're kind of getting that out to the world from the spring, and we'll release it as patterns. I'm working on that at the moment. And then weirdly, I've just put through my diary, April, May, I will be looking at Christmas designs. So looking at, which seems mad in July, doesn't it? But I don't know about you, Claire, but I'm never prepared for Christmas. I always think, round about October, I'm going, I should do a Christmas design. And then, of course, I'm too late. So I've got Christmas in my mind. But from a personal point of view, I think when you run your own business and are freelance, you always worry about, basically where the money's going to come from. So you're always thinking about, all right, I have to do this to make sure that there's an income. And it's not that I'm in a position where I've got so much money that I don't have to think about that. And it's not that at all. But I need to take my foot off the gas a little bit with designs, because what I've realised I do is I've done a crochet along every year for 12 years. So every year there is that pressure to create a crochet along. And I think I've got to the point where, the pressure is so much that it's stopping me from creating stuff. So what I've decided to do is sit back a little bit, do smaller projects, like a little Christmas stocking, or I don't know, maybe even some garments, but just take my foot off the brake in terms of the crochet alongs because they are such a big undertaking. And also, you know, things like actually spending time with my family and doing some exercise and stuff like that, which when you get to your mid-50s and the doctor's saying, always just have a little look at your blood pressure and stuff like that, it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like, actually, let's now make time for a bit of life, actually. And I'm very lucky again that I am in that position where I can take my foot off the brake a little bit. Do you know what? I've actually booked myself onto a workshop to go and learn how to embroider onto knitwear. And it's all those sort of things that I've been the one leading it. And I want to be the one having that life where I go and learn new skills and, you know, just do what all those women were doing when I was 25 and teaching them. I want to be that person now a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah. My thing that I don't run myself is my street dance class. And I absolutely love going to that class because somebody else is the one that's doing the choreography and the teaching, and I just get to have all the fun of the doing of it.
Yes, exactly that.
And that realization for you as well of being able to take a bit of time and look at things differently is very similar to the realization that the managerial role at Rowan wasn't for you. As a freelancer, you could just keep going rush. I've got to put stuff out all the time.
Absolutely. And what I realised I was in danger of doing was just pushing out a design that I wasn't in love with. And I have to be massively in love with them. So, yeah, I'm quite excited about it. It's quite nice. I quite like being 55, you know. I think it's that thing of I used to be very anxious, and it's that realisation at 50 that you don't actually have to care what anybody thinks of you, and it's quite freeing. I feel like I know my stuff now, and I feel comfortable with it all in every aspect of my life.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of thing we want to communicate on this show.
And I was thinking last night about how stressed I was when I had that job with Rowan, and how it sapped, you know, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just not right for me. I think I'm just lucky that I've been able to make the decisions based on what I want to do as opposed to what I have to do. And I'm very aware of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant. How can people connect with you?
My design name is Jane Crowfoot, but my company name is Janie Crow. Basically because Crowfoot, people always wanted to say Crawford or Crowford or Crowfoot. You know, it was always nobody. Honestly, Claire, letters through our door are always addressed to the wrong people. So we made it Janie Crow. And now I get people saying to me, are you Jane Crowfoot or Janie Crow? It's two different people. So the company is Janie Crow. Sorry, I was just like, blah. The company is Janie Crow. And pretty much if you put Janie Crow in on Instagram or Facebook or your search engine, you will find us. If you put crochet in as well, you'll definitely find us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been fabulous.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's really nice. I live such a little hermit life that it's nice to talk to people other than my surrounding family and my little I have a lovely little team. I have a team of about, all in all, there's 5 of us and a graphic designer, Steph. So there's 6 of us, really. So I'm talking to a very small team a lot of the time. Yeah.
No, it's been fabulous to talk with you too. Thanks so much for listening to Creativity Found. I hope you enjoyed this episode and gained some value from it. If you did, perhaps you'd like to contribute a small monetary sign of appreciation, either by becoming a regular supporter from as little as $3 per month, using the link in the show notes, or if you're listening on a value for value enabled app, such as Fountain, TrueFans or Podverse, feel free to send a few sats my way. I also occasionally promote products that I personally use, so please use the affiliate link where relevant if you are buying from those fine companies. Thanks so much, I really appreciate it.